I'd like to call the meeting of the Economic Development Authority to order at 6:32. The first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the meeting of February the 4th, which have been distributed.
I move we approve the minutes as written.
Second.
All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. The second item on the agenda is Megan Flanagan to give her presentation about the Urban Land Institute's proposal for Lake Elmo to do a technical assistance panel concerned with the 180 acres that were part of the settlement.
Excellent. Thank you for having me back. I was here a few months ago, and we talked about what a TAP is, and I was asked to come back with a proposal with two options for you. So that's what we'll be talking about tonight. And just as a reminder, our mission is to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide. So as you look into how you use this land, I think our land use experts and who are in part of this mission would be wonderfully beneficial for you. As we talked about before, we have more than 48,000 members worldwide for ULI, and about 550 of them are local. And we do a lot of work both locally and globally in the world of land use and the built environment, including sharing best practices, doing research, and publishing our reports. And our TAPs are a key part of that work we do, not just in Minnesota, but around the world. And as we talked about when I was here before, is a TAP is conducted at the request of a community that is asking for our members to share their expertise on a specific land use or policy challenge. I was actually talking with one of my members last week about, what sets ULI apart from other real estate organizations and other member professional associations. And I thought he summed it up really well, that we're about solving difficult problems. And the TAP is, I think, a key way that we do that. And as we talked about last time I was here, Minnesota has done more than 20 TAPs over the past 15 years. We'll be doing another one in 2 weeks in Oakdale, so not too far away. And we have had more than 120 volunteers take part in these TAPs over the last 15 years. And it's part of a robust series of advisory services we do for the public sector. So looking at what could work for Lake Elmo, we're looking at two options. So the first option I'm presenting is a day-and-a-half TAP. And this is similar to the one we did in Little Canada last year and the one we'll be doing in Oakdale later this month. And a day and a half, essentially, you start, usually we start in the afternoon of the first day with a site tour where we actually get out and walk the area we're looking at, because you see it so much better when you're up close and on your feet. And we have the sponsors give us the tour and share kind of their knowledge of the area and the area's history. And then we do an informal reception that evening, which is a great way to get our stakeholders together and really have a conversation and start to learn how people feel about the area in an informal, no-pressure setting. And then the second day is a true work day. We start with breakfast and a briefing by the sponsor. We talk with stakeholders, to get their insight in small group interviews, and then our panel goes to work. So they'll spend several hours creating their recommendations and then putting together a presentation of the panel's recommendations. And we can do that two ways. We can just do an informal presentation to city staff and come back to a meeting like this later that you already have on the calendar to do a formal presentation, or we can do the formal presentation right away. So we are very flexible in how we do things to make it work best for the sponsor. A day-and-a-half TAP will usually be 4 to 6 local panelists, so it will be cross-sectoral. We always have a developer, we always have an architect, and then the rest of the panel we kind of build out based on the needs of the study. I'll have a summary report complete within 2 months, so that's probably going to be about 30 pages or so, including lots of really fun graphs and drawings and charts. And then, and that investment is about 17,500 plus meals. So that's the first option. The second option goes a little deeper. So essentially, it gives us an extra workday and it gives us extra panelists. And what that extra time allows is we can do more stakeholder interviews, so we can talk to more people, and we'll often do what we call specialty interviews. For example, if we're in an area where one of the concerns is public safety, we might have a group interview that's focused on the public safety. So we'll talk to the police officers and other public safety professionals. So that just gives us, having more time gives us more time to talk to people. We might do a special meeting with elected officials or appointed officials. So it just, again, having more time to speak with people. And we can, again, spend more time on the work session, formulate more recommendations and deeper recommendations. And again, we can present a formal presentation that day, or we can do an informal and come back later. With the longer TAP, we do larger panels, and we also have the opportunity to bring in panelists from out of the market. So if there's this particular expertise we're looking for, or an example of another community that has seen similar challenges and can bring that expertise, we're able to tap into, again, those 48,000 global members to bring in that expertise. And then we'll do a more in-depth report. Usually it's going to be more of the 50-page length. And then again, and we would also offer the option to present our recommendations not only to you, but also if you wanted us to go to any community groups or business groups or things like that, our panelists would do additional presentations. And again, because of the size and scope of that TAP is deeper, we're talking about $35,000. So I think that's all. I do have additional slides if you had any questions from our last meeting or needed a reminder on the process or the various responsibilities of the different factors. Yes?
I have one question, and that is, how do you define stakeholders, and how are they chosen?
Yes, that is a great question. So stakeholders, broadly defined, is really anyone who has a stake or an opinion about the area. And what we do is we work with our steering committee. So the steering committee consists of our panel chairs, our sponsors, so usually it's city staff, and then sometimes we might have other key people who are part of that steering committee. And that committee works together to identify the stakeholder list. Typical stakeholders can include nearby property owners, can include community groups, nearby business owners. So basically, sometimes like church groups, or if there's other civic organizations nearby. But again, it kind of depends on what the question is and what the project is, how we identify this. But I will say it's important. We like to hear from as many voices as we can. And also, we don't just want to hear from cheerleaders. We want to hear from people who are, be negative or have some concerns or questions about the process. It's really important to get all those voices.
Yeah, a couple of questions. First, I get the more people on the panel and the extra day and stuff like that, but it looked to me, if I'm understanding it right, that one of the biggest differences between options 1 and 2 is that with 2, there's some back and forth. For example, it says there's a preliminary report, and then it looks like steering committee, maybe council, review that preliminary report and get a chance to understand it a bit, and then throw questions and concerns back at you, which then gets folded into more work. And frankly, that seems huge to me, because otherwise, option 1, you spend your day and a half, and then in a couple of months we get a final report. Without that back and forth. Am I right there?
Yeah, so we'll offer it in both. Obviously, like I'll write the first draft of, the way we usually do is we write the first draft of the report. Usually the chairs review the first draft. Second draft I will send to the sponsor, and we'll take comments. And I always say, remember that you're engaging us to offer this neutral perspective. So not all communities like every recommendation we make. Most of them have been pretty happy with our work, but sometimes there's a recommendation in there that they might not agree with. But I think still including that is important. But I would say yes, in both cases, we'll take the back and forth. We'll definitely hear the concerns. Just with a deeper report, because we take longer to write it, just based on the scope that usually it's a longer report, I think that does give us a little more opportunity to have those further discussions.
The other question I had, actually, you made a comment about possibly bringing in somebody outside the marketplace because they have some special expertise. How would you know what you would need until you've actually started, the work on the tap? You wouldn't know you'd need that, would you,
Well,
before you start?
When we're working with the steering committee, that's part of one of the key roles of that steering committee. And that's why it's important to have both the panel chairs and the sponsor staff on that steering committee. Because that's where we really look at what the questions are going to be. And as we're so if I'll give an example, the TAP we did in Minneapolis, the warehouse district, one of the things that came up in the steering committee was they realized they really wanted to have someone who had an understanding of nightlife because it's an entertainment district. And that came up, and, looking at our local panelists, we said, well, we have some people who might have a little, but we really didn't see any experts in our local membership. But I did reach out to the ULI network. There's actually a Slack channel of other executive directors in other cities. And one of my colleague in Philadelphia recommended Raheem Manning, who is actually they call him the night mayor of Philadelphia. He has a job where he's in charge of the city's nightlife and nighttime economy. And so we brought him in as one of our panelists. So that's why the work of the steering committee is so important, because that's where we identify what expertise we need.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that there's a feedback mechanism. It's just not so much in-depth presentations to stakeholder groups and such. My question is on the decision-making for these other projects in Oakdale and Little Canada. It seems like they went with more of an option one approach. Can you speak to us about their thinking? Was there a similar option two on the table, I presume?
Yes, and they
Yeah.
kind of looked at both. And in both cases, I mean, if you think about, like in Little Canada, we looked at 3 plots, but it was really 3 city-owned parcels, and they were smaller. So really, they were just looking for how do we use these to incent development, right? And so it was a highest and best use question, but it really wasn't digging deep into, what exactly are we going to build there? So, again, there's a lot of factors. It's budget. I know that's definitely a factor. It's how deep do you feel like we need to go in the question?
And is that a question back to, like, my members here, Jason, like, so the sale process failed before, I wasn't involved with EDA at the time. Does this project warrant that option 2 scale and scope? Like, that's the decision at hand, but without some history here, can you offer any insights?
One of the ways to think about this is that it is such a large site, it's 180 acres, you really want to figure out the land use too, and what's appropriate currently.
I can hear you.
And then the other thing to consider is that we've been talking to the county CDA, and it looks like they have a grant that could cover 50%. So when you're looking at these numbers, hopefully we will have a grant to cover 50%. There's still money in that fund. It's a large area, so I definitely think option 2 is appropriate if you wanted to go in that direction.
That's helpful context, yeah.
Before we ask for a motion on this, I have one other question for Community Development Director Stapa, and that is, what would happen then? Let's say, for example, that we do the TAP and we get the report, then the EDA says, okay, that looks good, then the council has to approve what would happen next. For example, what does the TAP suggest, and would the council agree that should be done? Do you see that as being the way it goes?
Correct. So this would.
Or do you see any other process that has to take place in order to use this information?
To use the information, I think we would go through the same process that we talked about with the old firehouse, essentially move forward, look if we need to make comp plan amendments, and then write an RFP, bring the RFP back to the EDA and the council, and see if we want to go in that direction. I think with the TAP too, we've talked about the fire station, and a lot of people are excited about the fire station. I think this is part of the planning process to get more people involved and understand this opportunity. So I think if the report comes back, probably have the council acknowledge it and maybe workshop it just to make sure it's the direction they want to go in, and then we can start that process with writing an RFP.
Okay, could you see the possibility that council would read our report and say, well, we need more detail, let's go back to ULI and see if we can go in a little different direction or a little different level of detail than we got in the first one?
I don't think so. I think with a 2-day and asking the questions and being prepared and having the back and forth with the report, that hopefully it's something that council would support. And if there are minor questions that need to be answered, I think we could work through those.
thank
And if we need to go back to ULI, maybe, but hopefully we're really close to taking that next step to actually putting it out. It is in our work plan to put this out for next year, so.
I understand. Thank you.
I do have another question. That's okay. Speaking of questions, the front page says that the city has identified two things: the need to understand what land uses would generate the most property tax, and also the pros and cons of dividing the site or selling it in one. Now, it struck me that that might be, and maybe, are you thinking that those are the questions that you're getting from council and steering committee? Or are questions likely to be more detailed than that?
Yeah, I think one of the keys to a successful TAP is really honing in on the questions. So I think this is where, I mean, that might be overarching themes, but this is where we sit down with the steering committee and we really think, you know, what are some actionable questions that you want the answers to? And it might be, you know, what maybe it is about the property tax revenue. Maybe it's about how do we use this as a catalyst for further, you know, development of the type we'd like to see in Lake Elmo. So really that is such a key part of the process and that's where it's really important, I think, to have the panel chairs part of that conversation because of their expertise in land use. They're going to be really helpful in honing in on those questions. And also anyone I would bring in as a chair will have done at least one TAP, so if not more, so they're going to be really familiar with the process and the needs to get that question right.
So if I understand it right, the questions to be answered would actually be developed, you know, as the group is all put together and the TAP starts.
Yeah, so the questions would be developed by the steering committee. So, and again, the steering committee would be city staff, our panel chairs, myself, and any other key stakeholders who would be part of that planning process. And that's one of the charges of the steering committee is to develop those questions because and one of the reasons the questions are so important is that helps us identify the expertise that we need in filling out the rest of the panel. So for example, if you're asking, you know, questions related to placemaking as part, you know, if that's just as a sample, I'm going to make sure I have someone with expertise in placemaking on that panel. If the question relates to housing, we'll want to make sure we have someone with that housing expertise.
And I do not speak on behalf of all council. I can make a reasonable hypothesis that additional questions could be, are there certain uses that are better for, if the goal is to increase, to broaden the tax base, are there certain uses that are better at doing so? Are there certain uses that are not as good, whether it's for the actual tax base itself, whether it's uses that are not compatible with that area? I would hypothesize another possible question could be phasing, because it's not just, because it is two parcels, it's north and south. But it's also phasing of how do you do 180 acres? Do you want a single person to do it in phases? Do you want 6 different people to do it all at 6 different times? That's an engineering question too. I think there are additional questions, but and maybe I didn't catch it, but for either way, whether it's 1 day or 2 day, I assume there will be a slot or 2 for EDA members.
We wouldn't have ED members on the panel because, again, it's really important that all the panelists are neutral and from outside the community. But if we felt it was important to have, for example, we could have an EDA member on the steering committee, which helps plan the TAP. And definitely we would consider you all stakeholders too and want to have that voice.
That's what I meant. Question for staff then, because presuming the report comes out, presuming council is fully functional and we, you know, do our thing correctly, we don't delay for hours and weeks on end, would we want there to be a joint meeting with EDA and council to go over the report? Because this is a voluminous report.
I think probably a workshop.
Because I could see there being some advantages to that, kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone instead of possibility of it being kicked back to EDA. I can say as a council member from a policy side, like, I mean, you all know this 180 acres is from our lawsuit with 3M that we filed as a city. And we no longer can file any claims as a city against 3M. That ship has sailed. So this land, if indeed there are future costs that are incurred for their pollution that aren't being covered by their consent order, which is another story, one can argue this is an economic tool to help with some of those future costs that will be with us for perpetuity.
Yeah, forever.
So I guess my 2 cents is to do this correct, well, this is we now the 3rd time, but the first time in this, thoughtful, do a tap. I don't know about day 1 or day 2. I want to hear from fellow members on this one, but for me as a council member, like, this land matters. And we're only going to get probably one chance to really, once it's sold and we start to phase it, that's the path we're going. Like, I don't want to be in a situation where you sometimes see failed developments, which occurs sometimes with a recession.
Yep.
So we're having really good timing with that right now. But how do you, okay, so let's talk about that. Do you foresee any impact for this tap with current economic conditions? How is that going to impact what this would look like? Or is that such a macro level issue that it's still not going to be something that some of the experts might?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's something I will say all of my members are talking about all of the time. Every meeting we've had, every program we've had recently, the economic issues have definitely been top of mind. And so I think it adds a layer to the conversation. I don't think it's going to, I don't think the TAP itself, right? You think about the TAP as an exercise. It's bringing these experts together to talk about it. I don't think it would impact the operations of the TAP itself. Now, I do think that will probably be something that our panelists are going to talk about when they're formulating their recommendations. And it might be that we want to make sure we have someone either with a capital markets perspective or with a financial lens, who's part of the panel, who can really help us, understand that. Because this is something that's, I was just joking, I have a program next week and I have someone doing a capital markets update. And he's like, I don't think I'm going to do my slides till that morning because if I do them ahead of time, they're going to be out of date. So I think it's just this time we're in. It's definitely something that will come up.
And then with Oakdale, what were they doing the tap for?
12th and Geneva, that area.
Enlighten me.
It is a strip mall area, kind of. And so they've got a couple older strip malls there, as well as some the Century Oaks apartments in that area. So again, they're looking for highest and best use. How do we ascend? They've had a few proposals fall through for that area. So that's what they're looking. And I think part of what they're hoping to get out of the TAP is some documentation and some reinforcement so that the next time someone comes in with a proposal or they start talking to someone about putting together a proposal, they've got a stronger base of information.
I'm watching the clock here, and I'm thinking that we need to wrap this up, but I have one more question, and that is, would it be appropriate to invite someone from the Planning Commission, the Lake Elmo Planning Commission, to be one of the steering committee members?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to call for a motion on this.
I move that we accept the TAP and go the 2.5 days because the extra costs is a drop in the bucket compared to what might be lost if we make inappropriate moves.
I second that motion and ask for any discussion.
No, I appreciate the context too, and yeah, I think it's all helpful and helps solidify my decision to support that.
Mitchell, do you have any comment?
I guess my only question, has the city ever done a tap before? This is the first one. Okay.
We had ULI come to the city in 2017 or so to do an analysis on the old village. And it wasn't, I wouldn't call it a tap, it was more of a seminar maybe, let's sit
Is
down.
it like a half day
Yeah.
thing? Yeah.
I was the millennial in the room. And anytime, well, what does the millennial think? Well, this is awkward. But the premise was, with the old village, are there ways what does the old village need to sustain itself in terms of people, flow of people, business types? And really, I don't recall there being an actionable report that came from it. So it was not a tap in this regard. No, we haven't done something like that.
I'll have to look up and see if I can find some notes from that. I've only been with ULI since 2023, so that was before I was around.
I would say it was 2017-ish, give or take.
Yeah, I'll try to see if I can find out who was involved with that.
The taps are usually a big projects. I think
Yeah.
they've only done, what, 20 in the last 15 years? So,
Okay, well, I'd like to call for a vote. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Hearing no dissent, we approve the motion.
Excellent.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you. And I guess Ashley and Jason, I'll be in touch. All right.
Okay, we have one more item to handle in the next 2 minutes, and that is, there is a scheduled meetings for the coming year that need to be approved. I'll read them off. June 3rd, August 19th, October 7th, and December 2nd. Are there any comments on that? If you want to look at your schedule and see if you're pretty much available for those, that would be helpful. I'd like to move that this schedule be approved.
Just before we do, you jumped to the motion before I was ready. What date is Memorial Day? Is it the weekend before June 3rd?
I don't know.
Mr. Google says.
It is, May 26th, that is the weekend before, but that's Monday, so it would be about a week before, so, yeah, I'm okay with it.
good with that?
I'm working for the weekend. I don't know what December looks like, but I'm committed.
You're committed, really?
All right. I'll be here. December 2nd, I think it was.
Oh, that type of committed, okay.
Oh,
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
None opposed? Okay, let's go with the schedule.
committed to EDA.
Do we need a motion to adjourn, or can we just
We
quit?
can just hit the gap.
Don, place moves to adjourn.
So no straight.